Welcome to Snail Story, where slow, heartfelt stories are told with intention and care. How's your day going? Whether it's been exhausting or fulfilling, we hope the story ahead brings you a little peace or a gentle reminder that you deserve to be heard. If you love stories about healing, self-worth, and emotionally mature relationships, don't forget to subscribe to Snail Story so you never miss a journey that might just speak to your heart. Now, make yourself a warm cup of tea, find a quiet spot, and let's dive into the story of a seemingly forgotten assistant who chose to walk away in order to find herself again. The Cross and Whitmore Capitol building stood tall and proud in the heart of Manhattan's financial district, gleaming under the early summer sunlight. Designer suits, hurried footsteps, and the sharp click of heels echoed through the grand lobby, making Madeline Scott feel slightly out of place. The young woman, her brown hair neatly tied back, wore a light gray suit that hugged her slender frame. She stood in front of the executive elevator, clutching a freshly signed offer letter and employment contract in her hands. Her heart pounded, but her face remained composed. Today was her first day at New York's most prestigious investment firm, and she had been assigned as the personal secretary to none other than Aidan Cross, the infamously cold and exacting vice president. Aidan, a name spoken with a mixture of awe and apprehension by everyone in the company. Rumor had it he had driven 3 secretaries to quit within 6 months, for something as minor as misreplying to an email. When the elevator doors opened at the 52nd floor, Madeline took a deep breath and stepped in. His office was minimalist to the point of being cold: glass, steel, and immaculate white lighting. No flowers, no artwork, just a young man standing by the window, sunlight hitting his navy suit, sharp as the gaze in his eyes. "Scott, right?" he said, without turning around. "Yes, Mr. Cross." "You have 3 minutes to familiarize yourself
with the office.
Then I need a draft agenda for this afternoon's strategic meeting. I haven't received a detailed briefing yet." "Then you now have 2 minutes and 55 seconds. His voice was as crisp and cold as a razor blade, but Madeline merely bowed her head and quietly got to work. That was the first moment she realized this world had no room for explanations, only results. The first week passed like a whirlwind. Aidan gave orders in an emotionless tone, was perpetually unsatisfied, and never once offered praise. Her reports were slashed in red ink, emails corrected line by line, and in every meeting she sat silently behind him, taking notes without making a sound. Madeline had once thought herself capable, but here she felt like a beginner. She made mistakes. And though Aidan never raised his voice, his silence, his sharp, observant eyes, made her feel as if she had failed some life-or-death exam. But strangely, he never fired her. One late evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Madeline was still revising a presentation as per his instructions. She was so exhausted she didn't notice someone standing behind her. "I thought you'd quit after your first week," Aidan said, hands in his pockets, leaning against the doorway. Startled, Madeline looked up, then returned to her work. "I don't give up that easily." He studied her for a few seconds, then left without another word. That was the first time. His eyes weren't cold, just quietly watchful. As time went on, Madeline learned to read his intentions through a single glance, how to resolve a crisis in minutes, and how to hold her ground in a world dominated by powerful, demanding individuals who could dismiss her contributions with a glance, simply because of her gender or age. She still got scolded, still faced challenges, but each stumble only made her stand taller. One day, after a grueling 3-hour meeting, Madeline was quietly gathering documents in the conference room. When they were alone, Aidan suddenly said, "The version of the plan you edited this morning, it's better than the original." Madeline froze. Did he just compliment her? Aidan stood, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the door. "But next time, don't use that font. Looks too childish." And with that, he walked away, leaving her with an unexpected smile tugging at her lips. It was, in his own Aidan Cross way, her very first compliment. Years passed. Madeline was no longer the timid young woman she once was. She now held several international certifications and had volunteered in multiple NGO projects, things Aidan knew nothing about. She was still his personal secretary, discreet, professional, and unwavering in her dedication. But within the towering walls of Cross and Whitmore Capital, no one called her anything else but Mr. Cross's assistant. Until one fateful business trip. That changed everything. 3 years had passed since Madeline Scott first stepped into Cross and Whitmore Capital. By now her name had become a constant presence on the schedules of high-level meetings, strategic business trips, and elite events she never truly felt she belonged to. She was still the personal assistant to Aidan Cross, the same cold, exacting executive she had met on day one. But what had changed was Madeline. No longer the fresh graduate fumbling with presentation decks and unsure how to word an email, she now held 3 international business management certifications, had completed an advanced financial strategy program in London, and was quietly supporting an educational initiative for immigrant women funded by an international nonprofit. No one in the company knew about those things, and Aidan Cross, the man she worked beside every single day, didn't know either. At the firm, Madeline worked without complaint. She arrived earlier than anyone, left later than most, ate lunch in the conference room, and was often the last to turn off the lights on the 52nd floor. But what caught people's attention wasn't her competence. It was her silence. Because even though she managed everything behind the scenes, scheduling, booking flights, researching clients, even selecting personalized gifts for the women who came and went from Aidan's side, Madeline never once showed emotion. She knew the preferences of every woman Aidan had ever dated, not because she cared, but because it was her job to ensure his image remained flawless. A curated kind of perfection. One Aidan didn't even seem to care about, but that still had to be maintained for strategic reasons. And at those extravagant events, where Madeline stood silently behind him, the women often teased her with soft but cutting remarks. Isn't Aidan lucky to have an assistant who remembers every woman's favorite flower on her birthday? You should learn how to pick ties from his secretary. She probably knows his favorite color better than he does. Words that seemed harmless at first glance. But Madeline understood. They didn't see her as a colleague. They saw her as a servant with status. Aidan heard those comments. She could feel his eyes flick toward her from time to time, but he never said a word. And in that silence, Madeline learned how to protect herself. Not by hiding, but by standing tall. The International Investment Summit in Singapore was one of the year's most anticipated events. Top corporations from the U.S., Japan, the UK, and the Middle East gathered here, where billion-dollar handshakes could happen over a single cocktail party. This year, Cross and Whitmore Capital was one of only 3 firms invited to the strategic negotiation round with the Morimoto Group, a Japanese investment giant whose credit fund was expanding into the North American market. Aidan Cross led the delegation. Madeline Scott was the one who prepared every logistical detail for the trip, from the financial strategy brief, private meeting schedules, to the fine-tuning of each speech. Everything went according to plan, until the welcome reception, where Aidan was introduced to the senior executive of Morimoto Group, Sayaka Morimoto. A stunning, confident, and powerful woman, unsurprisingly rumored to be a former classmate of Aidan's from Harvard Business School. The exchange of glances between them didn't escape Madeline's eyes, but she remained in her place, standing quietly behind Aidan, holding a tablet, ready to record any change in the schedule. That evening, Sayaka approached her, a glass of champagne in hand, her smile as delicate as a cherry blossom. "Madeline, right?" she asked in perfect English. "Yes," Madeline replied politely. "You arranged everything for this trip?" Madeline nodded. "So you're also responsible for the discussion notes sent out today?" "I am." Sayaka smiled and held out a printed document. "Unfortunately, it seems you sent the wrong version. Instead of the executive summary, you sent the internal draft, with some sensitive details on your firm's risk policy." Her, Voice was gentle, but the words cut like a blade. Madeline felt a chill shoot through her entire body. She had triple-checked everything. She knew there had been no mistake. But when Aiden approached, Sayaka's tone softened. "I was just telling Aiden about the little mishap. I'm sure it was just a mix-up. Tight schedules and all that, right?" Aiden turned to Madeline. "You sent the wrong file?" he asked, his voice sharp as ice. "No. I checked it carefully." "Carefully?" Aiden interrupted. "Then what reason do you have for letting the partner discover the mistake before I did?" Madeline clenched her fists. She had never been humiliated in front of a partner before, but this time she said nothing. "I'm sorry," was all she said. Aiden didn't respond. He turned and walked off with Sayaka, who wore a satisfied smile behind his back. That night, Madeline didn't sleep. She reopened every folder, every email, every encrypted file she had sent. No mistakes. And then she found it. The document had been swapped via an internal redirect, an auto-forward from the corporate communications team, linked through an internal address. It was a path someone like Sayaka, given her close relationship with Aiden, could have easily accessed. During their private exchange before the reception, Madeline understood this wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated blow, and she also knew reacting wasn't enough. To fight back, she needed results. The next day, before the formal negotiations, she contacted an old friend, now a senior coordinator at an international NGO based in Bangkok, someone she had worked with on cross-border projects years ago. Through secure channels, Madeline obtained information about a halted Morimoto project in Myanmar, suspended due to allegations surrounding unethical labor conditions. But she didn't use it as blackmail. Instead, she restructured the entire negotiation approach, suggesting Cross and Whitmore propose a sustainability-focused collaboration, turning Morimoto's reputational risk into a chance for image rehabilitation. When they entered the boardroom, the next morning, Aiden remained distant. He hadn't said a word to her all day. But when Sayaka began presenting heavy-handed terms, Madeline stood up and respectfully requested to present an alternative proposal, backed by communication impact data linking the project to corporate social responsibility programs. The room shifted. Sayaka went silent. Aiden sat still, neither stopping her nor stepping in. And in the end, the Morimoto Group signed the deal, not only maintaining their investment, but increasing their budget for community engagement. That afternoon, back at the hotel, Madeline was gathering her materials when someone knocked on her door. She opened it. It was Aiden. "How did you do it?" he asked bluntly. "Do what?" "Save this morning's negotiation." Madeline didn't answer right away. She spoke slowly. "You don't know who I am, Aiden. For 3 years you've never once asked what I studied, where I came from, or what I've done before this job. You gave orders. I followed them." Aiden tightened his grip on his briefcase. His expression softened just slightly. "I thought I was training you," he said quietly. "But maybe I'm the one being left behind." Madeline didn't reply, because even she didn't know what she felt at that moment. Was it pride, hurt, or just exhaustion? 3 days after the International Investment Summit, when Madeline returned to New York, life seemed to resume as usual. The 52nd floor office was still so quiet you could hear keystrokes echo. Aiden Cross remained buried in meetings from dawn till late, speaking no more than necessary. And Madeline was still Madeline, his personal secretary, editing every line of a draft, setting reminders, relaying messages, preparing quarterly strategy plans. But she alone wasn't surprised when things began to shift. Monday morning, 7:42 a.m. Madeline was checking her email when Karina, the media department assistant, gently knocked on her door. "You'll want to see this," Karina said, placing a newspaper on Madeline's desk. On the inside cover of the Business Herald was a photo, Madeline presenting in front of the Morimoto Group's executive board. She didn't remember anyone taking it, probably one of the photographers hired for the summit. The bold headline read, The quiet woman behind a billion-dollar deal, Madeline Scott, from anonymous secretary to unlikely strategist. Madeline frowned. She hadn't been interviewed. The article quoted an anonymous internal source, recapping the Singapore incident, emphasizing her role, and not holding back in portraying Aidan Cross as an executive who failed to act swiftly in a crisis. She understood exactly what was happening. The media had begun to pull her out of the shadows, and no one on the executive board liked that. By 9 a.m., when Madeline stepped into the conference room to set down the pre-meeting documents, Aidan was already there, reading that same article. He didn't look at her, just turned the pages slowly. "Did you give information to the press?" he asked in a flat tone. Madeline met his eyes directly. "No." "You're sure?" "You think I'm the kind of person who would chase the spotlight to outshine my own boss?" Aidan stayed silent for a few seconds, then folded the paper. "You're not that kind of person," but others didn't agree. 2 days later, in a senior board meeting, Romero Dillard, a high-ranking executive, launched the first attack. "Cross, you let your personal secretary speak on behalf of the firm to an international partner, and now she's being written about as some corporate strategist? Do you realize what that says about our internal structure?" "It reflects her actual competence," Aidan replied calmly. "It reflects a lack of control," Romero snapped. "We're being steered by the media narrative. 3 publications have already contacted us this week asking about Madeline Scott. What are you planning to do?" Aidan looked him in the eye. "I'm not planning anything. She did her job. If the media wants to write about it, they will. And if the stock dips because the company seems fractured from the inside?" Romero smirked. At that moment, Aidan understood. The issue wasn't Madeline. The issue was that they couldn't accept someone like her could actually be that good. That afternoon, while Madeline was reorganizing project files at her desk, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. An email from the Journal Times. Request for an exclusive interview. A message from a CNBC reporter. "Do you have a comment on Sayaka Morimoto's remarks?" And a missed call from an unknown number, with a voicemail. "We're from TEDx New York. We'd love to invite you to speak about
female leadership in international strategy."
Madeline didn't call back, didn't respond, didn't say a word, but the entire company had already heard. When she stepped out of the elevator, the same people who used to overlook her now paused. Some looked impressed, others uncomfortable. That evening, long after most had left, Aidan was still in his office. Madeline brought in a project report. Before she placed it on the table, he looked up and asked, "You're not going to do the TEDx talk?" Madeline blinked, surprised. "You know," Karina told me. She shook her head. "I'm not going. I didn't do any of this for attention." "Then, why did you do it?" he asked. Madeline looked at him. The overhead light cast shadows across his sharp features, but for the first time his eyes weren't cold. They held something closer to sincerity. "Because I'm good at what I do," she said simply. "Because I want to prove that women like me aren't just here to take notes and pour coffee." Aidan gave a slight nod. "And what if I told you? I've never seen you as someone who just pours coffee." Madeline tilted her head, half smiling, half not. "You've never really seen me at all, Aidan, not in any way." And with that, she placed the report on his desk and turned to leave. That night, as Aidan exited the building, his eyes caught a giant LED screen outside the financial center. There she was, her photo illuminated in lights. Madeline Scott, the woman behind the historic deal. For the first time, Aidan felt like he was watching the story of his life unfold from the outside. Monday morning, before her coffee even had a chance to cool, Madeline Scott sent out a brief email with just 2 sentences and an attached PDF. "Dear Mr. Cross, I hereby formally submit my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. No explanation. No long-winded thank you. No blame. Just finality, like a door being shut after someone has stepped through it too many times without ever being invited inside. When Aidan read the email, he thought he was seeing things. Madeline? Resigning? He immediately called Karina. She simply shook her head. I just found out too. She didn't tell anyone. That afternoon, Aidan waited outside the conference room, stopping Madeline as she stepped out. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't call her by her title. Madeline. She turned to him. Calm? Composed? Why? I think the letter was pretty clear. No, I'm not asking about the letter. I'm asking, why now? When the media finally sees your worth? When people are just beginning to recognize what you can do. Madeleine paused for a moment, then replied, because when everyone finally saw me, I stopped seeing myself here. Aidan stood in silence. I don't blame you, Aidan. You never promised me anything. But I never wanted to stay somewhere where I was only seen as a utility, not a partner, not a strategist, not even a woman. Just, she'll handle it. She stopped, then gave a faint smile. And you know what's strange? I spent 3 years waiting for your recognition. But when it finally came, I didn't need it anymore. 2 weeks later, on her last day, there were no flowers, no farewell party, no tearful slideshow like in most office send-offs, just a single bouquet of white orchids sitting on her desk. No name on the card, but Madeline knew who had sent it. She didn't reply. Instead, she placed a small note inside the drawer where she used to keep his meticulously organized meeting schedules for the past 4 years. Sometimes all a person really needs is to be seen as a human being, not just a role. 1 week after she left, something felt missing inside the Cross and Whitmore building. Karina whispered to a coworker that the scheduling system was a mess. Partners kept asking where the original assistant had gone, and Aidan, he started arriving later to work, changed his coffee preference, and stared at an empty inbox a little too long each morning. He didn't make statements to the press, didn't clarify any articles, didn't explain her departure. But sometimes, alone in the boardroom, he'd replay a recording from the Singapore summit. Her voice clear, calm, precise. As if she always knew exactly what she was doing. Aidan Cross, the man who controlled every number, every strategy, every million-dollar decision, for the first time, couldn't control how it felt to lose a woman who had never asked him for anything. 3 months later, at a summit on social enterprise, Aidan happened to spot her photo on a conference poster. Madeline Scott, Strategic Advisor, Sustainable Enterprise Development Program. She stood on stage, wearing a white shirt and black slacks, her hair tied low. Her voice was poised, confident, but her eyes shone brighter than any day he had seen her on the 52nd floor. And when she finished her talk, the auditorium stood in applause. Aidan remained seated. He didn't walk up to her, didn't push through the crowd to say something. He quietly left the hall, carrying with him a quiet realization. People don't always walk away because they're weak. Sometimes they walk away because they've finally grown strong enough to choose a different path. It was a quiet weekend afternoon, and New York had finally cooled down after a string of sweltering days. Madeline Scott was browsing books at a small independent bookstore in West Village, the kind of place she often visited when she needed a break from numbers, spreadsheets, and the performance-driven world of high finance. She wore a soft beige knit dress, her hair loosely down, and in her hand was The Myth of the Nice Girl. Nearby, a group of college students chattered excitedly about a community project. Their open, earnest tone made her smile. She remembered being like that once. As she moved to the section on social impact and entrepreneurship, she accidentally bumped into someone rounding the aisle from the other side. A hand instinctively reached out, steadying her shoulder. Sorry. They both stopped when their eyes met. Aidan Cross. He was wearing a rolled-up white shirt, dark jeans, and carried a canvas tote filled with a few old books. No suit, no expensive watch, and none of the cold stare she once knew. Just a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a seminar or a night class. Madeline instinctively stepped back, but he spoke first. It's been a while. She gave a small nod. I didn't expect to see you here. Aiden smiled, not the half-smile of boardrooms or business deals, but something lighter. I'm looking for books on community education. Seems I've got to relearn a few fundamentals. Madeline didn't smile back, but her eyes no longer held distance. I heard you stepped down from your executive role. Temporarily, he nodded. I'm working on a legal aid project for small businesses in the Bronx. You? She tilted her head slightly. I know it sounds strange, but maybe you have to lose the things you once thought were guaranteed before you realize what actually matters. They stood together in the narrow aisle, surrounded by the warm yellow glow of reading lamps and shelves full of stories waiting to be opened. No office, no unread emails, no crowded meeting schedules, just two people who had once known each other so well, and yet never really understood one another. Madeline, Aiden said after a brief silence, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not leaving sooner. She let out a soft laugh. Not bitter, just a breath of something like relief. You know, I used to think you were emotionless, cold, even ruthless. But after I left, I realized you were just someone trying to control the world, to avoid losing anything. Aiden met her gaze, his expression gentler now. You're right, but because of that, I lost the most valuable thing, a partner I should have learned from, not commanded. I'm not looking for an apology, Aiden. I'm not apologizing. Madeline paused. I just want to start over, not to go back, but if possible, to be friends. She was quiet for a moment. Friends? He nodded. No more boss and assistant. No power plays or performance reviews. Just two people who once crossed paths and might actually understand each other this time. Madeline looked at him, as if weighing not just his words, but the man himself, old, new, and real. Finally she nodded. How about a coffee? I know a little place just around the corner, Aiden smiled. No fancy machines, but the best waffles I've ever had. They stepped out of the bookstore together. Dusk had just begun to settle. Streetlights flickered on, the scent of warm waffles wafted from a nearby cart, and jazz music floated out from a second-floor window. Everything felt softer, slower, as the two of them walked side by side. No talk of the past, no attempts to explain or undo, just two people who had once rushed through life, now finally slowing down enough to really see each other. The coffee lasted longer than expected. By the second cup, Madeline and Aiden no longer sat like two strangers who had randomly crossed paths. They laughed more, shared old stories, the behind-the-scenes mishaps at Cross and Whitmore that no one had dared to mention back then. As the last rays of sunlight spilled through the cafe window, Aiden leaned his elbow on the table, looking at Madeline with a hint of hesitation. I've always wanted to tell you something. She tilted her head. What is it? Aiden took a slow breath. Gone was the cold exterior he'd worn for years, replaced with something rare, almost fragile. Sincerity. I know you worked hard. Madeline froze. I didn't just know. I saw it. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. When you first arrived, you were clumsy, nervous, afraid to make mistakes. And I deliberately made it harder. I gave you tasks you weren't ready for. I kept my distance, on purpose. I remember you staying late into the night just to fix one presentation. I remember you secretly studying advanced Excel during your lunch breaks. I remember you came to my office 3 times before you had the courage to ask how I liked my coffee. Madeline smiled faintly, but something flickered in her eyes. I remember everything, Madeline. I never forgot. Then why didn't you ever say anything? She asked softly, almost like a breath. Aiden looked down at his hands, then back at her. Because I thought I was training you. I thought it was best to keep things professional, that praising you would make you complacent. I foolishly believed that if I stayed silent long enough, you'd eventually just know. He let out a dry laugh. The problem is, you did understand. And then you understood that you didn't need me to grow anymore. They sat in silence. Even the clink of a spoon against a glass at the next table felt distant. Madeline shook her head slightly, her gaze still fixed on him. "You knew I was good, but you didn't think I deserved to be seen. I know. You're not the only one who's ever stayed silent when they should have acknowledged someone, but you were the only one whose recognition I actually wanted." For the first time, Aiden had no argument. "I didn't know what I was working so hard for," she continued. "Not until I left. And then I realized I was trying to get someone like you to see me." Aiden said nothing, but his eyes stayed on her, as if silently blaming himself for seeing too late. "Did you ever think about saying this sooner?" she asked. "I did, many times, but every time you did something brilliant, I just felt smaller. I was jealous of the very person I claimed I was mentoring." Madeline let out a quiet laugh, not bitter, not sad, just a soft exhale. "You know," she said, "the first time I considered leaving wasn't because I felt unrecognized. It was because I was scared that if I stayed another year, I'd start to accept that role as my fate, and I'd stop being myself." They stepped out of the cafe into the cool night air. The faint smell of fresh bread drifted from the corner bakery. Aiden walked beside her, not too close, but close enough to hear her footsteps on the pavement. "Madeline," he said, his voice low and steady. "Yeah? I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not planning to offer it, because there's nothing to forgive." She looked at him, her expression softening. "I don't resent you anymore, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to start over from where I left off." "I understand. Actually," she said slowly, "I'm learning how to trust someone again, not because of what they say, but because of how they choose to change." Aiden smiled, this time a real smile. "Then, may I walk with you for a while, if you'll let me?" Madeline looked ahead. The traffic light turned green in the distance. Pedestrians stepped onto the crosswalk. She nodded gently. "Just for a while." And they walked on. No longer boss and assistant. No one leading, no one following. Just two people who had once rushed through life, now learning how to walk side by side. There was no clear date marking the beginning of Madeline and Aiden's relationship. No confession. No, "Are we dating now?" text. It unfolded the way morning fades into afternoon. Silent, seamless, unnoticed, until one day you simply look up and realize the light has changed. They started seeing each other every weekend, sometimes at a bookstore, sometimes at a cozy cafe in Brooklyn, once even at a local fair where Madeline happened to be a guest speaker. No one brought up the past. No one asked about the future. Their conversations were simple: books, community projects, Aiden's awkward attempts at Italian cooking, or how Madeline was teaching a 67-year-old woman how to use email. The only thing clearly present between them was absolute respect, and a quiet, persistent feeling that felt a lot like love, only they hadn't called it that. Not yet. One drizzly October afternoon, they stood beneath the awning of a bookstore after attending a talk on social enterprise development. A chilly breeze slipped beneath Aiden's shirt cuffs, while Madeline fumbled to shove a pile of notes
into her canvas bag. He reached over to hold the flap open for her, then laughed. "You still haven't changed, always carrying too many papers."
"And you still don't know how to fold them properly," she replied with a slight smile. Another breeze passed between them. Aiden looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't the gaze of a former boss evaluating an employee, but of a man quietly admiring the woman he once let slip away. Madeline. "Yeah? I like you." She froze, not out of shock, but because of how he said it, as if he were saying, "I like rainy days," or "I like the tea you make." "I know," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "But are you sure it's me you like? Or the version of yourself you see changing around me?" Aiden let out a soft laugh, the kind that comes from being caught off guard but not minding. "Maybe both." "Then don't say anything else," Madeline said gently. "Just keep walking beside me. If the road is long enough, I'll know." From that day on, they still didn't define what they were. but little habits began to weave themselves into each other's lives. Madeline grew used to Aidan calling every Saturday morning just to ask if she wanted waffles, and Aidan kept finding himself surprised by how Madeline would show up at exactly the moment he had just bombed a mock pitch with a youth entrepreneurship group. It wasn't coincidence. It was attention, a wordless connection. One evening they attended a university conference on education reform. Aidan had been invited to speak alongside representatives from nonprofit organizations. Madeline sat in the third row, legs crossed, notebook in hand. Aidan walked on stage without a printed speech. He stood quietly for a moment, scanning the audience, then began. I used to think I understood what effectiveness meant. I measured everything by results, speed, profit, until I realized some things can't be charted, like the perseverance of someone who never speaks up but is always there. And sometimes the most important lesson is learning to truly see that person before it's too late. Madeline went still. She didn't know for sure who the speech was meant for, but she knew that in that auditorium there was only one person who had once gone unseen and was now present in every word. That night, Aidan drove her home. I've been meaning to make things clear for a long time, he said quietly as the car stopped. Madeline unbuckled her seatbelt, not rushing to leave. You don't have to, she said. We don't need to define this. She turned to him, her gaze calm, but deep, like a long pause in the middle of someone's life. I like us the way we are, not because we need to be called in love, but because there's no one who understands me more than you do. Aidan nodded. In his heart, there was nothing left to confirm. She hadn't said, I like you too. But he knew, and sometimes the deepest kind of love is the one that never needs a label. It was a Thursday morning, and Madeline was preparing to present at a conference on community education when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She switched it to silent, but the look on her assistant June's face was enough to tell her something wasn't right. After her talk, she stepped out into the hallway and checked her phone. Business Spotlight had published a headline in bold, Madeline Scott, from executive assistant to the power behind Aidan Cross. Below it were candid photos of them together at recent events, the bookstore, cafes, last week's education summit. One image had zoomed in on Aidan looking at her with a snide caption, Is it just professional admiration? Madeline let out a soft breath. Not surprised, just tired. The first call came from a major sponsor. We fully support your personal life, of course, but we'd like to ensure our program maintains its public independence. The second call was from a reporter who had once championed her work. Would you consider giving an exclusive? I think this might be a good opportunity to reframe the narrative. Madeline turned her phone off. She looked out through the glass windows. The city buzzed on, people rushing toward their goals. But she stood still, a quiet question surfacing, one she thought she had already answered. Who am I in the story I'm telling? That evening, Aidan called. I just saw it. They used photos from the summit, too. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Madeline replied. I knew this would come. I just didn't think it would come this soon. I can issue a press release. Say we're just project collaborators. She was silent. Or, Aidan continued, I can tell the truth. What truth? That I care about you. That I respect you, in work and in life. That there's nothing to hide. Madeline leaned back in her chair. The warm light cast a soft glow across her cheek. Her voice quieted. Are you ready for the name Aidan Cross to be linked with someone like me? Someone who was once your assistant, once overlooked, once dismissed, within your own system? Aidan didn't answer right away. I don't need you to elevate my image. I just want you beside me, exactly as you are. Madeline gave a small smile. Then I need to be sure of one thing, Aidan, that I don't become the woman next to you and lose Madeline Scott, the name I worked for years to build. Then don't let anyone define you. No one can, unless I let them. 2 days later, Aidan attended a press event alone. for a new collaboration between his firm and a group of social enterprises. A journalist raised their hand. Cross, there are rumors that your personal relationship with Miss Scott is the reason behind your recent investment shift. Care to comment? Aiden looked up. Steady, unflinching. No. A personal relationship isn't the reason, but she is part of why I've changed how I see life. So you confirm there's a personal relationship beyond work? I confirm that she's the person I've listened to and respected more than anyone else these past few years. And as for what to call our relationship, I'll let her decide that. Madeline watched the broadcast from her office. June gave her a knowing look. You planning to stay silent forever? I'm not staying silent, Madeline said. I'm just choosing when I speak. And why? And when will you be ready? Madeline looked out the window and smiled. When? I know that if I walk toward him, it's not because he made me public. It's because I'm sure I won't lose myself standing beside him. That night, she texted Aiden, tomorrow, 7 p.m. I have something to say, but not to the media. Aiden replied, I'll be there. I'll wait. That evening, the little Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet Brooklyn alley was packed. Candlelight flickered on every table, casting soft halos against the walls. Aiden had arrived early, chosen a table by the window, and waited. No phone, no laptop, no emails. Just waiting. At exactly 7 p.m., Madeline walked in. She wore a dark, teal silk dress, her hair tied back neatly, her face free of elaborate makeup. But to Aiden, she had always been someone worth looking at twice. Not because of her appearance, but because of the presence she carried. Calm, intelligent, confidently quiet. He stood and pulled out her chair. She sat down with a faint smile. You still have your old habits, and you're still always on time. I chose this place, Madeline said, glancing around. Somewhere no one knows who we are. Who we are doesn't matter nearly as much as what we are to each other. She looked at him directly. So, what do you think we are? Aiden paused, then spoke slowly. I don't want to call you my girlfriend. It feels like a label I'm trying to assign. I don't want you by my side because the media says it's acceptable. I want you to be you, someone free to stay or to walk away, if that makes you feel stronger. Madeline pressed her lips together, her voice soft but firm. I left once, not because I hated you, but because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I didn't want affection, even love, to cost me the identity I spent years building. Aiden nodded. He didn't protest, didn't try to soften her words. He simply placed his hand on the table, palm open, no pressure for her to take it. I don't need you beside me to complete me. I just want you, because you're you. She was quiet. Not out of overwhelming emotion, but because she felt the sincerity in how he let go of control. He wasn't Aiden Cross of Cross and Whitmore, not the executive, not the boss, just Aiden, the man who had once hurt her, once overlooked her, and now wanted to learn how not to do that again. After dinner, they didn't take a car. They simply walked down narrow streets side by side. You've changed, Madeline said, hands tucked into her coat pockets. Not just because of me. No, because I wanted to know what it felt like to be understood. And you think I understand you? You were the first person to really see me, even before I saw myself. When they reached Madeline's doorstep, they stopped. I don't know where this is going, she said, meeting his eyes. I'm not making promises. I don't need promises, just honesty. She smiled softly. Well, tomorrow night, I have a talk in Harlem. Want to come? If I get to sit in the front row? No, the back. I always glance at the crowd when I get nervous. Aiden nodded. Then I'll be the one sitting quietly in the back row, the way you once sat quietly for 5 years. That night, there was no kiss, no lingering embrace, just a good night and a gaze at the doorstep that lingered longer than words ever could. There was no need for labels, no need for plans, only the quiet presence of two people who had grown up through hurt and were now learning how to be near each other without losing themselves. 1 year later, autumn in New York had scattered golden leaves all along the walking paths of Riverside Park. Inside a small auditorium at a community support center, warm yellow lights glowed softly against a newly installed sign. Own voice. Every woman deserves a voice that's heard. Madeline Scott stepped up to the podium. She wore a simple white blouse, her hair neatly tied back, her gaze calm, yet filled with quiet resolve. I didn't build Own Voice to become a massive organization. I didn't aim to change the world overnight. But I believe this: if one woman who once felt pushed to the margins can stand and say, "I deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected," then that alone is change enough. Applause filled the room, but Madeline's eyes landed on the very last row. He was there, Aidan Cross, not in a VIP seat, not giving a speech, not listed as a sponsor. He was just present, like he always was when she needed him. After the ceremony, Aidan stood waiting by a small table at the end of the hallway where a few trays of cookies and pitchers of water were laid out for guests. Madeline walked over, smiling. "Still refusing to step on stage?" "No, I prefer watching you." "Not afraid the press will spot you?" Aidan shrugged. "They don't really care about the man standing behind a successful woman." Madeline laughed, then turned serious. "Thank you for letting me walk this path on my own." "Not to walk it alone, Madeline, but to know that you could." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something she had never said before. "When I left the firm, I didn't think I'd ever see you like this. No suit, no power, not standing above, just quietly standing with me. And what do you think now?" "I think maybe letting someone stand beside you doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're strong enough to choose the right person." Aidan nodded. "I'm not here to protect you. I just want to walk next to you, if you'll let me." That winter came late. On snowy mornings, Madeline still arrived at the center early, and sometimes Aidan would show up, not as a financial backer, but simply as the man who brought 2 cups of hot chocolate and a gaze that never demanded anything in return. They didn't move in together, didn't sign any contracts, didn't post romantic photos on social media, but every one of Madeline's close friends knew. Whenever she was anxious before a big speech, he'd be waiting outside, saying nothing, and whenever Aidan faced challenges in a risky investment deal, Madeline would send a simple message: "I'm here." One spring afternoon, they visited Aidan's mother in Vermont. The older woman looked at Madeline and nodded softly. "At last, you've chosen someone who calms you down, instead of someone who ignites you." Aidan smiled, gently squeezing Madeline's hand under the table. "No, Mom, I didn't choose her to calm me. I chose her because, for the first time, I wanted to become someone better. Not for anyone else, but because for once I believed I was worth the effort." When Own Voice later won the award for Best Emerging Social Initiative of the Year, the host asked Madeline, "Who's the first person you'd like to thank?" She scanned the room, then answered clearly, "I want to thank someone who once didn't believe in me, who stayed silent when a word of recognition would have meant everything, but who later learned to truly listen, not because of pressure, but out of respect. And I know that wherever he is in the room, he still sees me, even when I'm not trying to be seen." From his seat, Aidan didn't clap. He just smiled, softly, and that was enough. There was no wedding, no diamond ring, no label for what they had. Just 2 people who had once made mistakes, once drifted apart, once walked away, now choosing to walk forward, together. Not because they needed each other, but because when they were together, they could be wholly, unapologetically themselves. 3 years after the grand opening of the first Own Voice Center in Manhattan, a new sign was mounted on the front of a stately building in San Francisco. Own Voice, West Coast Chapter. Madeline stood at the entrance, wearing a long knit coat, a printed strategic plan in hand. Her eyes reflected a calm that comes from no longer needing to prove anything. By now, she no longer ran the center's daily operations. A new leadership team, made up of women once supported by Own Voice, had taken over the core programs. Madeline remained only as a strategic advisor and a storyteller. At the launch event for the new chapter, she didn't speak about financial models or performance metrics. Instead, she told a story. 5 years ago, I was an assistant, expected to show up on time, stay invisible, and do well in silence. Later, I didn't become a CEO or a director. I chose to step out of the spotlight so others could step in. And I've learned that the most powerful voice isn't always the loudest. It's the one that's heard at the right moment. The second chapter of Own Voice focused on single immigrant mothers, offering financial literacy workshops, English classes, and legal aid. Aidan had helped connect the center to impact-focused venture capital networks. But, as always, his name never appeared on any posters. Only a small line printed at the back of the brochure read, "Supported by those who believe listening is the highest form of love." Late one night, Madeline sat writing in her home office at their new place in Brooklyn, a modest home with a balcony overlooking the park and a bookshelf that stretched from floor to ceiling. Aidan walked in, placed a warm cup of tea on her desk, and quietly sat beside her with a book. He said nothing, but by now, there was nothing that needed to be said. "They invited me to speak at TEDx next month," Madeline murmured without looking up. "What will you talk about?" "I'm not sure yet, but I do want to say this. Women don't need to be perfect to deserve to be heard. They only need a chance to rise and speak in their own voice." Aidan smiled softly. "Like you once did?" Madeline stopped writing and looked at him. "No, I was luckier. I had someone who stayed long enough to listen, even before I knew what I was really saying." The following year, Own Voice opened its third chapter in Austin, then Chicago, then Seattle. Each location carried a rhythm of its own, but the core spirit remained unchanged: to return the right to speak to those who had once been forced into silence, not by shouting louder, but by teaching others how to truly listen. Perhaps what resonates most with Madeline Scott's story isn't that she fell in love with a wealthy man, but that she once stayed silent, was misjudged, and had to protect herself with quiet professionalism. And in the end, she chose to walk away not out of heartbreak, but to preserve her own worth. In the real world, how many of us have tried to grow in silence? Have stood behind someone else's success without ever being fully seen? Have been called assistant, support, logistics, forgetting that we too were leading, just in a quieter way? Snail Story believes, loving the right way isn't about changing to fit someone's image. It's about being fully yourself when you're with them. And the right person isn't the one who hands you the spotlight, but the one who quietly sits in the back row watching you rise with unwavering, silent pride. So if you've ever been Madeline, are Madeline now, or are still becoming your own version of Madeline, Snail Story wants to say, you are not small. You're just waiting for the right moment to be seen. If this story touched something in your heart, feel free to share it. And if you had to rate today's story, what score would you give it out of 10? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being with Snail Story, where slow stories are told with a full heart and deep meaning. See you on the next journey.